Hello again. This is a bit of a continuation over the previous videos, just looking at Carmelo's statistics when he's on the court compared to off the court and whether it really is of benefit to his team or not, and also doing the same sorts of things with other players as well. I'm trying not to pick, amazing all-star type players because I want to try to come up with somewhat like-for-like comparisons, but we'll go through somewhat quickly. So we'll go all the way to the end first. So the first one we're looking at is DeAndre Jordan. As we can see here, it's pretty clear that the second unit, because he's almost always a starter, doesn't seem to be performing very well. As we can see that they always seem to be worse off. When he's in the first team, they always seem to be going quite well. What I've noticed with these sorts of statistics, the bigger a player is, I guess the more impact they can have, especially on the defensive side of the court. Even if they're not an outstanding defender, they're just bigger, so I feel their potential for impacting the game is greater. It's just a bit of a general rule. There are exceptions to this, obviously. But looking every single year, DeAndre has been of benefit to his team, sometimes massively so, especially in recent future, interestingly. Yellow, by the way, will highlight when they're an all-star. So he's only ever been a one-time all-star, but he has been a tremendous influence on his team. Embiid, obviously only a very short career, so not much to really look at here. But yeah, the team is always better off with him on the court. Sometimes the second unit isn't going too well without him on the court. But yeah, the team's always doing better with him on the court. It's quite interesting that they're almost 6 points worse off when they don't have him on the court in his first season, when he only played those 30-odd games. But the team was slightly better than not when he was on the court, in the sense of they're scoring only a little bit more than their opposition, but they're getting outscored heavily when he's not. Kemba Walker. Now, here we go to the thing that I'd mentioned about how a smaller player can sometimes struggle to make as much of an impact as what a bigger player would. Whilst people would think that Kemba is a pretty good player, and there's no doubt he is a good player, but he's not exactly the greatest player. And quite interestingly, in the last full season that he played with Charlotte, they're actually a lot better without him on the court, which is somewhat surprising, given that he was an all-star. Might be something to have a look at. We can see as well that part of the reason of Charlotte being so bad is that the team is quite bad without him on the court. Almost exclusively, they've really struggled with him off the court. But as we can see, mainly green here, the team is better off with him than not. Zach LaVine, statistically, not a very good player. A very spectacular, flashy player, but not very consistent. Not a great defender. Just not overly good, especially playing for quite poor teams in Minnesota and Chicago, and their teams that obviously would have weak benches. So that's one thing. So anytime he is starting, if he's not doing as well as the bench, the second lineup, it's quite a worry, because they're normally pretty poor. They don't have much depth. But it sort of goes the same way that when he's part of the second unit, well, they don't have a real good starting five either. Karl Anthony Towns, I believe, has performed admirably statistically. Andrew Wiggins, not really. And to be honest, the rest of the team, not really either. Dirk Nowitzki. Now, this is an example of an extremely good player in the sense of he's always been contributing. At times, the contributions have been massive. The impact that he has been huge. It's made a big difference having him on the court compared to not. And a very easy way to tell this is that the team is almost always losing when he's not on the court, but they're almost always winning when he is on the court. His latest season being an exception to the rule, likewise with his rookie season. But I believe his rookie season he was 19 and his final season he was 41. So it's pretty good to have a player that is contributing mightily almost exclusively between ages 20 and 40. That's something that any team would want. And obviously, like I'd mentioned, a bigger player seems to have more impacts. I don't think anyone thinks that Dirk is a great defender, but I think the stats would show that the team defense is better with Dirk on the court than not. It could be a collateral effect. It could be something along the lines of, because of the offensive threat that he poses, it fatigues teams more, and therefore they don't have as much energy for either their own offense or their own defense. But it might make things easier to defend when you've got a better offensive talent on the floor, which is something that we could have expected with Melo, but it hasn't really shown that to be the case. Now, Chris Paul, here's a bit of an exception to my earlier rule in the sense of smaller players statistically won't show up as much. I think it's harder for a smaller player to show up as well statistically. It's a bit like you don't expect a small player to get as many blocks. You don't expect them to deter as many shots in the paint. You don't expect post play to be made that much harder when you've got smaller players in there. It's just a bit of an expectation. It's easy to get into passing lanes when you've got bigger, longer limbs. So it's quite amazing how good Chris Paul is. As we can see, his teams have always been better during the regular season with him on the court. Green every single year, and at the start of his time with the Clippers, massively so. And even before he did his ACL in New Orleans, there's like MVP-like numbers there. The team is like 15 points better with him on the court. 15 points per 100. Enormous. Interestingly as well, this probably spells out why they've never won anything. I know this is only regular season, not postseason, but it shows that every team he's been a part of, except for this latest Houston one, the team is losing when he's not on the court, and sometimes massively so. So I guess it's a bit tricky for him that he's always sort of carrying all this weight whilst he's on the court, but then when he's sitting on the bench getting his hard-earned rest, well-earned rest, the team really, really suffers. Sometimes, as we can see, massively so, but it's just consistent. It's every single season. When it comes to the net performance, unsurprisingly, these numbers are enormous. The team is doing amazingly well with him on the court, amazingly bad with him off the court. It's a massive, massive net performance. And as you can see, he's been an all-star a number of times as a result. Same with Dirk. Been all-star a number of times due to consistently being a very positive, impactful player. When we go to John Wall, we see that he's not been that great of a player. I apologise as well, I haven't got the all-star yellow on the side. But either way, it shows that he's been quite inconsistent. He obviously hasn't started very well earlier in his career, been quite the net negative. But even at his best, he hasn't performed that well. Like, he's a positive, but it's not a real big positive. It's not a very noticeable positive. The average in, let's say, this little purple patch of his 5 years, the average is 1. Whilst the average for any 5 years of Chris Paul, so even in his, let's go these 4 years actually, that's an average of 8.1, and this is when he's getting well into his 30s. So it's a little bit surprising that what should be peak athleticism Wall is nowhere near the player that Chris Paul is. And I think part of it's got to do with defense, some of it's got to do with decision making, with turnovers, and I think injuries plays a part, and also, and this is a real big one, efficiency of shooting efficiency. If you're not an efficient shot, you're not an efficient player, largely, unless you're a really good defender. Which brings us to our next man, Iguodala. This might surprise some people, but Iguodala his team benefits quite largely by having him, even as a rookie. Now, his team obviously didn't have much success when he's at Philadelphia, and as we can see, it's largely because, even though he is of net benefit every time, his team suffers without him on the court. Now, another thing that I want to mention from here, these years here that I've highlighted, that's when he's with the Golden State Warriors. So any time that it's green on the far right-hand column, that's an amazing effort, given that there's amazing players on the court. There's amazing players on that team. So for him to for the team to be better off with him than without says a lot, since some of the times he's not on the court, they would have had Klay Thompson and Steph Curry and Draymond and Klay. They had very, very talented players on the court for periods of time where Iguodala wasn't there. So to still show up as a positive is massive. And quite interestingly as well, the team's always positive when he's on the court, so it doesn't matter who he's with, largely. Doesn't matter if he's with players that aren't as well known as the stars I mentioned earlier. And then the last one I want to show, last little thing as well, he's only been an All-Star once. I haven't got it coloured in, but all this performance, all this green, only once an All-Star. Whilst we look at Melo, he's been an All-Star these years. So I think we can tell from having a look at these stats that Melo is not a particularly impressive player. And for him to be All-Star so many times, he's been an All-Star comparable amount of times to Dirk. But look at the positive impact Dirk has always had on his team. That is 19 years in a row of positive impact. While Melo has had 5 there and 1 up here. He's had 6 in total. And even a player like Iguodala that we saw, he opened his career with 8 in a row where he was positive. I think it shows that there was a lot of inefficiencies going on with Melo's play, and it shows that he's not that great of a player. Obviously, not all players can be great, but given the amount of money that Melo has earned in his career and the amount of success and making it to Olympic teams and All-Star teams, it doesn't seem to add up. Perhaps there's more in the stats, so I guess I'll look at it in time. If you've got any more players that you want me to have a look at, because the players that I had a look at today was upon request from a friend of mine, just let me know in the comments below.